Welcome back to the Intuition Incubator. Before I introduce today's guest, we wanted to tell you that this episode is brought to you by Abby Havermann Coaching. We were not designed to live steeped in denial, pain, and suffering, to doubt ourselves, our work ethic, our parenting, our bossing, our relationship status. We are here on earth to deliver all that we are and all that we are meant to be. Today, I have a very special guest, my good friend, Patty Brick. As one of the first female internet consultants in Florida, Patty has an illustrious career path built on following her internal guidance. Working as a technical writer at the Pentagon, among other things, she collected experience on how to surrender. Later, and seemingly out of thin air, Patty manifested a position at the NIH, that is the National Institute of Health, folks, where she managed a $50 million contract and 65 employees who designed, implemented, maintained, troubleshot, and secured our nation's biomedical research agency's network. As if that wasn't enough, in 2018, Patty co-founded CoHeal, the first remote coherence healing group of Dr. Joe Dispenza, which quickly grew to 11,000 members and became the pool from which research on remote healing is now being done. Patty inspires her listeners to awaken to their true potential by teaching how to weave spirituality into the smallest moments of everyday life. Her influence has launched countless people into inspired, compassionate action. Welcome, Patty.
Wow, Abby, that's an amazing introduction. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here and being with you, as always.
Yes, you are welcome. I had to write that for Patty because she wouldn't tell you any of that. And in fact, I didn't know any of that until about 3 years after I met you.
Right.
And so one of the things that is, so interesting to me about your story, and I'm going to give you some time to take it, to tell us, is, this idea of internal guidance. And you and I, throughout the years together, we've been on a long journey together, right? And continue on that journey of self-evolution. And one of the things that we often talk about is how a lot of people who do the type of work that we do get in an automatic program. They think they're not in it, but they are in it. And it's the stuff that's in the day-to-day, the little stuff. And so many of us are reaching for the mystical and reaching for miracles and trying to manifest things in our life, which of course we all love to do. And I definitely want to hear your stories of manifestation. But in that, we lose what's happening inside our brain and body day by day by day, and allowing ourselves to live in that human experience. And so you and I talk about that a lot. And when we're stuck in that human experience, we may ring each other up and have a conversation about it.
You kick my ass.
Yes, I'll kick your ass. Yeah. It's one of my favorite pastimes for sure. And so that's really why I wanted to have you on the Intuition Incubator, because that is one of my real goals with this podcast, is to get kind of beyond this just think positive, everything's great. And, and you can manifest anything and you can be anything, but to really get down into that human experience. And it requires a tremendous amount of self-observation. And a tremendous amount of being honest with ourselves, right? About who we're really being in any given moment. So with that, share with us how you came upon this journey.
So it was So I've always been interested in the metaphysical, always. And in 1979, which is a long time ago, which is longer than most people have been alive. I've been studying this stuff longer than most people have been alive. I came across Edgar Cayce. I came across this channeled reading called Seth by Jane Roberts. And it was about creating your own reality and your personal belief. And the first book was The Nature of Personal Reality and how we create our personal reality. And I was fascinated with it, and I resonated with it instantly. And Jane Roberts, who was really the original channeler in the New Age era, That's how I see it. She channeled Seth for at least 30 books. And I have...
And for those people who don't know Seth,
Yep.
What would you like to say?
Seth is he was a precursor to Abraham Hicks. Actually, Abraham Hicks studied under Seth.
Okay.
In a way, I mean, not Abraham Hicks himself, but itself, but they read Seth's works. And then after a while, Abraham Hicks came into being. So when I first started studying Seth about creation, one of his first book was called Seth Speaks, and everything that you and I have studied is in that book. 50 years later, it is there already.
Already there.
And so that's where I began my journey. So I've been alone on this planet studying this shit all by myself for years. And I love it, but I had to be in the closet about it because it was so woo-woo. And my friends would just make fun of me. Like, I remember 30 years ago, friend, can you believe that Patty says that we create our beliefs create our reality? And I'm like,
well, especially when you're working in places like the Pentagon and NIH and in IT.
Yeah.
Very linear thinking.
Oh my
career.
God. So let me just, I want to share too that I became a teacher because that's what I've always wanted to do since I was 6 years old. I wanted to be a teacher. So I got my degree in education. And that is, I have never taken a computer course, by the way. So here I am, a right brain person operating in a left brain world, right? I'm a teacher. And in 1988, 89, I get these computers in my lab I taught gifted students. All right. So I taught really, really smart kids. That's why I know about some of your kids, because I see them. And so I'm supposed to be teaching, but there was no curriculum. And I was also a writer too. I was a writer of curriculum in Palm Beach County schools. So we're talking 1989, and a friend of mine comes out and says, "Hey, Patty, I hear you're a teacher and I hear that you write curriculum." I'm like, "Yeah, I do." And he says, "IBM is looking for you, somebody just like you, and you have the skills, and we want you to come and work for us." And I was like, "Excuse me? Me?" And they said, "Yeah." And what was really interesting, he says, he was telling me about the computer program, and that's the one I was working on in the classroom. It didn't have a curriculum.
No.
And so I looked around when he asked me this, and I'm looking and like, and I had been 10 years into the school system at the time. So I'm really old. And I'm like, is this what I'm going to be doing the rest of my life? And I had this opportunity. So I literally stepped into the unknown. And I went to go work for IBM. And I became a technical writer. And we didn't have Microsoft Word back then.
Or ChatGPT for that matter.
Oh, no. They were studying artificial intelligence for sure, but not that. We had, the big floppy disks back then.
Right.
So I worked with these really big professors from Rutgers University, and I ended up writing more than 100 books. And manuals, technical manuals. And that's where I learned to be a left brain person. And everything had to be right. And everything had to be done in a language similar to HTML, which is how you write web pages. Right. So I wrote all of these manuals in this awful language, and everything had to come out right. Period. So then in 1994, a friend of mine came to me and said, "Hey, Patty, you could start your own web business." I'm like, "What? What are you talking about?" I'd already been writing web pages for years and didn't even know it because it was all in a markup language. And that's how I ended up in IT. I went from teaching to IT, and I had always wanted to be a therapist. But my friends were like, "You be a therapist?" It's kind of like saying you be a gifted teacher. So I ended up being a teacher of gifted kids. But I took the teaching, my skills that I learned in teaching, to learn how to manage people, because what I found at IBM when I left teaching, Abby, I don't know if you know this, but I haven't
known any of this so far.
Okay, so when I thought when I left teaching, I would be with a bunch of adults.
No, yeah,
What
no.
I found was that they were just little kids in big bodies.
Yeah, adults are very hard to find.
Oh,
yeah, and hard to be by that as well.
And they were backbiting and all these things. So I had to learn to bring my teaching skills and how to manage people. And so that's really started my IT career. And I never knew from one moment to the next if I was going to be employed or not, because it's a contractor kind of job and that kind of thing. But really what happened was in 1994, when my friend came to me and said I could do an internet consulting, I started looking into it, having no financial background, having no background in business whatsoever. And then IBM announced that they were closing the Boca Raton plant in Florida. And when they made that announcement, I saw everybody scurry away, go back into their offices, because we didn't have cubicles back then. We had offices. And they went online and they started looking for real estate in Austin and in Raleigh, North Carolina, because that's where they were going to move. And I'm like, this is the business to be in the internet business. And that's how it all. And so I went on and I started going around and giving seminars and giving lectures around town. And I remember this one woman saying, hey, Patty, what if I don't get on the internet? I said, you're going to have a life. That's what's going to happen.
So you knew back then.
I knew back then. And then out of that, I opened up the first websites for a lot of the county initiatives, like the county courthouse, the clerk of the court, a lot of the big name government agencies here locally. And that's how I got my start.
Yeah. Wow. That is incredible. And then obviously went on to do such amazing things. And I know, I personally happen to know that you didn't come from, great beginnings,
No.
that it was a very, very rough childhood. And I'm wondering what your path with your intuition really was, because I think from a very young age, even if you don't have a rough childhood, we are really kind of primed, and particularly since the industrial age, really to use left brain.
Yes.
And to kind of cut ourselves off from this internal knowing. And I'm curious about what you feel like, where you were not following it, where it came in, like where your relationship with your intuition began with that inner guidance.
Yeah, that's a really good question to ponder, because I remember when I was at IBM, I'm like, I couldn't understand. I was trying to figure out the difference between my intuition and my thoughts.
Yes.
I was like,
how do you know the difference? So many people ask that question.
And I would do an experiment. I'm like, how about if I go, so I'm like, I want to make a decision if I want to take I-95 or US 1. I remember this very specifically. And so I said, let me take I-95 because I think it's going to be faster. Well, I got on 95. And it was a parking lot. And so I said, oh, so maybe it's my first thought, or is it my second thought? And so I started just experimenting to find out, is this it or is this it?
Well, I love that.
Yeah, just practice. And so, but here's what this is a really important question, because I'm going to tell you when I really figured it out. And that is when I worked for this utility company a few years ago. It was about close to 10 years ago. And we were about ready to launch this very big security thing that would impact Florida utility customers. And it was a very important thing. And I wanted to have a meeting about it. And I felt really strongly about it. And my boss said, no, we don't need a meeting. But my heart, I knew it was the right thing. And I did it anyway, and it saved a lot of people's, a lot of grief in the community. But what I will tell you, what I've done more often than not, I should have had a B8. I have overridden what my heart says every time it says no. I abandon myself every time. I am in that mode, and I have brought so much pain to myself and others when I do not honor this. And I always know always when I'm doing the wrong thing. And so,
Yeah,
and so do you.
And so right. But it's sort of in hindsight almost. It's the difference between, what I talk about a lot is sort of knowing in your head and then knowing in your heart. Because if you really know it in your heart, where your intuition and all of that is, right? As soon as we see it there and learn it there, well, then we make a different choice.
Yes.
But when we only know it intellectually.
Oh, screw it.
Yeah. And it's something we look back on and say, gosh, I knew that. I did know that.
Yeah.
But it's almost like, I think about it as like a thought that like feels like it's way back in the far end of my brain, like way back there. I know it's there, but it's just not in front of me enough.
And it's my thinking that gets me in trouble. So so I want to go back to about this right brain, left brain thing, right? So I'm a right brain person. I'm I used to be very creative. And then I had to be this way.
Yeah.
So I spent more time over here and overthinking and overanalyzing. And I'm not good there. I've learned to be there because the cool thing about, even though I'm not a left brain person per se, the cool thing about it is I learned to support my intuition. So I would say, hey, you know what? This would cost $100,000. I would say that to somebody and they're like, are you crazy? And then I would get validation on it, but I learned how to support it by data. So people would not. Well, so let's say, for example, this guy, when he came to me years ago and he says, I want a website. And I looked at all his requirements and I said, and instantly I said, it's going to be $100,000. And he's like, well, no, I'm not going to pay that much money. I can only pay $11,000. So I'm going to tell you two parts of the story. Okay. So there's this woman who was helping me with it. And she was going up to a meeting that night. And it was so weird, Abby. She says, Patty, you're being used as a pawn. Well, the same requirements that this guy gave me, she was at a meeting with the same requirements that that we were working on together, like two totally separate things. So this guy comes to me with these requirements. I say it's $100,000.
Yeah.
I don't know that she's going to be going to a meeting in Chicago with these guys, and she's having dinner with them. And she says, these requirements sound really familiar. It's
the same guy?
Yes.
My gosh.
Not the same guy, but the same requirements from a different company.
Okay.
And that company said it was going to be $100,000.
Oh my gosh.
So I was validated immediately, right?
Yeah.
So that was one thing. But what I have learned to do is, what does it take to make that $100,000? This is before I become a project manager. I had to learn how much time it's going to take. How much is it going to cost? How much is the resources? How much is the software? How many people is it going to take? It takes a lot to just figure out how much that's going to be. But that's what I learned in IT, was how to support by data that amount. And so whatever I'm doing nowadays, I have to support it with important information. I can't just throw it off the top of my head.
Which is actually a really good point, because I think that the other way that people misunderstand intuition, one is with their thoughts, and then the other is kind of like, well, I can live off of berries and nuts and trees and, this sort of fantasy, right? That, and I think what happens too is that people get ping-ponged back and forth, because neither of those places are really where our wisdom lives. Neither of those places. And so we end up going from one spot of like, drive, push. I've got to do it this way. It's got to be linear. It's got to be logical, to, I just need to meditate more and everything will happen. And then meanwhile, our brain is looking for it to happen. It's not happening.
Yep.
And there's a voice we're not aware of that's going, what do you think? You can just make all this happen by manifestation? That's ridiculous. You've got to get back to work, and that is like part of that unconscious process that we were talking about, right? Like, what is really going on in your mind? And when you drop into your heart, what is really being said there? And sometimes what the heart is saying, right, is like, listen, you're going to have to do this to get that. You know, like you're going to like, you know, like it's going to be in your best interest to take these steps toward this thing.
And you bring up a really good point. And I think that's probably what we really need to talk about, is about people who that is going to be my work, is like people who think you can just manifest anything. And yes, you can. But in the fine print, this is what I say in my intro on my YouTube channel, is in the fine print, it says you have to be intentional, you have to work at it, you have to be conscious of it, and there are no guarantees.
Yeah, and I think this is really important to listen to because Patty's seen a lot of people do this work,
Yes.
a lot of people. In fact, like I said, I didn't know half of what I knew about Patty until I went to an event with her and I couldn't get down a quarter because everybody was stopping her. Oh, Patty. And I said, what the hell is going on? And she said, well, I'm kind of a celebrity. I was like, I had no idea, you know, that I was rooming with a celebrity. But you've seen a lot of people in the community. You've touched a lot of lives. And I think it's valuable information because we tend to hear about the great stories, which is fabulous, right? We need to hear those. We want to hear those. They're inspiring.
Yes.
Want to know that, right? But what happens to so many people is that when it doesn't happen to us, then it's this constant like barrage of beating ourselves up. What am I doing wrong? And that this can work for other people, but not for me. And then we're running this program while we're trying to create something. And all it is really working at that deeper level, becoming able to be aware of what is really happening. And of course, all of that is held in the body, right? Like we hold that in the body. And I personally can relate to it tremendously because I have a very stubborn part in my inner world that says other people can do this, you can't. And sometimes I will not do, you know, that type of a meditation or whatnot, because I know that there's something I'm coming up against and I'm not going to get there. So I got to go into relaxing that part, into allowing that part, into, you know, not pushing it away and being with that little girl, that her.
And even further. So let's talk about that, because I think it's, I know it's like really the most important piece. I posted something about this recently in another forum, but one of the things in the community is that people just love to give advice, you know?
Yes.
And like I said, I've been studying this shit longer than most people have been alive, and or study, you know, and it's like you have no clue. And especially when they come to me and tell me I need to be changing my beliefs, and I'm like 67 years old. Which one do you want me to start with? So, and you've witnessed and watched me go through my own things. You know, this stuff. There's so many layers, right? So in our bodies and in our DNA. There's so much to overcome.
And in past lives.
Yes, in past life, all of that. So I want to give you an example of what happened. So I posted this thing. In 2019, I was in a big room of 175 healees, people who were about ready to be healed by and Dr. Joe Dispenza is talking to them. And this is what he says. He says to them, this health condition is not your fault. You see? And then he goes on to say, in a deeply loving, empathetic way, that your life has been upended by your health condition, your family life, your business life, your friends. It's just your finances. It's taken a toll. Then he also says something like, and you may want to think about forgiving someone because it's probably related to your health condition. And if you can't find a way to forgive somebody, maybe there's something you've done that you want forgiveness for. Then the final thing he says, and this is all my memory, and if you don't continue doing the work, this is just a Band-Aid.
Mm-hmm.
And so everybody misses that part, and so when I was hosting healings, I would start out with healing, or is the root word for wholeness in an ancient Germanic language. So we're looking for wholeness.
Right.
That's how I would start out. And that came from the HEAL documentary, one of the doctors in the HEAL documentary. Then I would go, and this health condition is not your fault. And I would look at people, and they're really like, because what I've discovered is that people, well-meaning, they commit what a friend of mine used to call metaphysical malpractice. And it's when you blame yourself or you blame others for not creating what you wanted to create. So you want to be cured, right? And I'm not curing myself, so there must be something wrong with me. I'm thinking wrong. I'm not eating the right food. I'm not doing something. And so then we become disillusioned.
Yes.
Because we're so caught up in that, blah, 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 all that ruminating thinking. And it's so unloving to ourselves.
Right. And it really is an epidemic, I think, in our culture to do that. And to your point, it's like you can go to these beautiful, wonderful retreats, and all of that is being said. All of that is being said and shared and pointed out. And it just like goes sort of like when you're driving and you're looking at the road and all the trees are going by, you're not taking in you're not focusing on the trees. You're just focusing on this one point. And this little piece, which is like the biggest piece, gets overlooked.
Yes.
And I talk about this all the time as well, that the habit that you're trying to create or not create isn't necessarily like that you need to meditate or run more or exercise or whatever. That's an important habit. But the habit that's really in your way is what you say to yourself and how you feel about yourself when you don't do those things on that one day or that week, or you haven't started yet. That's the habit that really needs to be zeroed in on, right?
And I have seen so many people who have, actually, this one woman who I absolutely adore, she was brought to me with stage 4 cancer the second time. And after we went through her process, her grief process about what she was going to do, she says, I'm going to get on that stage one day. I'm like, well, how are you going to get there? She said, I'm just going to go, I know, between now and then, what are you going to do? And so she says, she had no clue. So we made a plan together. And a year later, she is cancer-free because she followed the plan. And she did get up on a stage in Cancun. So I was like really happy. And I happened to be there to watch it. It was just beautiful. And so it does happen.
Yeah.
However, it also happens because I have been on the other side of it as a co-founder of ProHeal, watching how many people. I've been to so many events. I've been more than 30 events with Dr. Joe, where I have seen people go back to their old self. Yeah. Because they don't have a way of maintaining, or they don't have the commitment to maintain. I have seen people
or they don't have the awareness, right? Like something is just slipping by. They're just not seeing
it. And part of this work is becoming the observer. But that takes a great deal of practice to say, okay, I'm going to sit right here. You and I have done it. We've done the Vipassana thing. We sit here and we watch our crazy thoughts just go all over the place. And to observe them and then change them. And there's so many.
Yep. Well, and not even, I do a lot of the Gurdjieff work, and it's not even so much about changing. It is literally observation, right? Like just literally observation. And so much, I think, of what happens too is that we get so attached to what we want.
Yes.
And attached to what we don't want.
Yep.
And if we take the teachings just at their surface, that's another unconscious process that's happening, as opposed to an attitude, around that we practice in positive intelligence, for example, that, everything can be turned into a gift and opportunity.
Yes.
Everything can be. And if we're in that space, then we are naturally in our heart. And when we're naturally in our heart, we are vibrating to the frequency that we need. But when we are so attached to, well, this is what I'm trying to get, this is what I'm trying to get, and I want to have it in this way. And then the brain takes over and says, well, I think you can get it by doing it this way and that way and the other way, right?
Yep.
And we always say, I mean, all of us in this world, the how is really none of our business.
Yeah.
The how is none of our business. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a really important point that, we get very attached to things, and the observation of being able to just watch your mind. And sometimes you can't, like my experience, as I've said before, of the Vipassana retreat, which is a 10 days, for those of you who don't know, 10-day silent meditative retreat that is the teachings of the Dhamma and Buddha. I call that and I think you would agree, we had a similar experience, but I call it my 10 days of torture. And my whole experience with that was I went, I got angry, I left. And the entire time I was aware that I was never able to really get to the spot of just observing what was happening inside me without emotion, without attachment to wanting to feel otherwise, and without wanting to stop feeling the way I was feeling. And that happens because this machine that we're walking around with on our head is it has a life of its own.
Yeah.
So
it does. I was go ahead because I had
no. I was just going to ask.
So I wanted to share something else about meditation too, about what you were talking to about. You weren't at that place, and I want to go back to my being introduced to Dr. Joe's work in 2017 with Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, which he told us in our little Jupiter group that was his foundational work and we needed to do it. Mm-hmm. So I decided I was going to start a book study. I'm going to do, that's what I do because I'm a teacher.
Right.
And so we started doing it. And in the back of the book of section 3 is this great practice of where it's kind of a 12-step program in recovery program, and where you identify everything that you want to unmemorize emotion, and then what are you going to change and blah, blah. And it goes with the meditation. So it was Thanksgiving about 8 months after I found Dr. Joe's work, and I had lost my job. And let me just say, this is part of the spiritual awakening. It's the mess that comes after it. And I just want everybody to know that there is a fucking mess that happens when you decide you want to have this life. So my marriage was falling apart. I lost my job. I lost my friends. I lost just about everything. And I was at the bottom. And in 2017, at Thanksgiving, I was all alone. And I decided to do Breaking the Habit meditation. And I was really resentful of my husband. I wanted to unmemorize resentment because my husband was screwing around. And so I went into my meditation trying to unlearn this thing. And then I hear this voice, and it's not my voice. I am in pure awareness. I'm just like there. No thinking. I'm not thinking. And this voice comes to me and says, your mother loved you. She just didn't know how to love you in the way that you needed to be loved. And oh, by the way, your husband loves you. He just can't love you in the way that you need to be loved. Now, that did not come from me, because this was one angry, bitter person. Right. So at the end of that meditation, and so I'm like, oh, okay. And then at the end of the meditation, Dr. Joe says, look for a sign that you've touched the divine. Right?
Yep.
So it's Thanksgiving weekend, and I go out and I go to my little favorite Goodwill store, and I walk into the Goodwill store, and there's my dead mother's jewelry box. Whoa. And I see it, and I'm like, and I hold I'm like, oh my God. And then I hear this song, and I'm listening to the words, and I go out to the car and I start Googling it, and it's the one that's called I Love My Life. Yeah. And that song is about a parent who says to his child, because my father was killed too, right? He says that tether your soul to me. I will never let go completely. Those are the first two lines of the song. And I'm like, I have always been connected to the divine. And it is never about what I think it is. It's about knowing that I am loved. So all this creation stuff. Yeah, sure. Yes, you can create your life. However, to me, the bottom line is that we are all connected to love. And through meditation, we can hear the answers. And it doesn't have to be breaking the habit, but it's getting into that alpha state or in that theta state where you're quiet enough to hear the guidance.
Yeah. And that it's inside of you.
It is inside, and it's not a thought.
It's not a thought.
It is not a thought. It is that voiceless voice. And I have come to really rely on my heart and being connected, knowing that no matter what, I am okay.
Yeah.
No matter what's going to happen. I don't need to be stressed out about anything because God's got my back. God is, or whatever God is, my higher, whatever you want to call it. The universe is always with me. I just have to.
Because it's in you.
Yes. And all around me.
All around you. Yeah.
And I don't have to manifest anything because one of the most important things that I love, like in Psalm 23, this came to me one day too when I was in this really shitty place in the 90s. And I kept hearing this voice. And I'm like, what? And it was the 23rd Psalm. Do you remember what that one is? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want.
Oh.
He leadeth me by their still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leads me into green pastures. Like there's always something there.
Yeah.
We have this shepherd that's always with us, but we are so blinded by our attachments, as you called it.
Yeah.
We have to have it our way. And when we have to have it our way, just like you said, that's when we get in trouble. And how about thy will be done? Instead of what I want, I limit myself in what I want.
Yeah.
Because I'm left wanting.
Right.
But if I am in gratitude and you just tell me what to do, and I'm going to tell you, this is what happened with me. So you want to hear this story about, so in 2005, I was in that place where money was stolen and I had no money left and I wasn't minding my own business. I was doing something else and I had no money again. And I'm in a condo. I'm on the ocean here in Singer Island. And I'm like, okay, God, what do I do? I don't know what to do because that's where I have to go usually. It's like I have to get to the desk, right? And I turn on the TV because Touched by an Angel is on because we didn't have streaming back then. And Tess is in this bookstore and she's moving things around. And the owner of the bookstore says, what are you doing moving things around? This is my business. You can't tell me what to do. And Tess, the angel of God, says, how can you be open to new possibilities if you're not willing to change things around? I'm like, all right, God, I'm willing to give up everything. Even my condo on the ocean, my family, I'm willing to give up everything. And that's the key right there.
Yep. Surrender.
And in 20 minutes, a friend of mine who used to work for me called and she says, what's going on? I tell her, she says, send me her resume. That's on a Tuesday. On Thursday, she runs into a friend of hers who's taking leave for surgery and she needs a technical writer. I can't make that shit up.
You can't make it up. I know. I was just going to say, you can't make it up. Yep. Can't make it.
I was in DC a week later working at the Pentagon. Me.
Unbelievable.
The Florida girl.
You're right. Right.
Like
unbelievable.
It was so incredible. And so during that summer when I was up there, my mother died. And I found out she was sick. I didn't know she was sick when I left, but she was dying and I didn't know it. So I was coming back and forth and I buried her on a Thursday. And in September, Hurricane Wilma came on Saturday. I went to work on Monday and I was let go. And I said, okay, God, just tell me what to do. You got me up here. Where do you want
Yep.
me to be? I didn't say
Yep.
I need a job. What the hell?
Right.
I
Right.
knew at
Right.
that
Right.
moment I had
Yeah.
to surrender again. Where do you want me to
Ugh,
be?
I love it. Yes.
So I went
Yeah.
on. So they gave me 2 weeks to go look for jobs. And I remember walking out of one of those big federal agencies. And at the same time, I was being chased by a headhunter who wanted me to work at the NIH as a technical writer. And I'm like, I don't want to work at the NIH. I want to work at the Pentagon. No, Patty, you want to work at the NIH? I'm like, no. And so I'm arguing. And so I come out of this agency. I said, okay, God, give me a sign. And this is what I do. I just ask for a sign and follow the breadcrumbs. And as soon as I got on the train, the metro train, there it was, the literal sign, NIH. I'm like, okay. And that's how I ended at the NIH.
Yep. Yep.
And
it's so great.
And that's how I run my life. What do you want me to do? And I don't do it always very well, but when I do remember, my suffering comes from my attachments of having to have what I want. So I try to let go of that shit. It's hard, but it's a practice, and be willing to sit with my observing, but sit with my pain.
Yeah. Yeah. Allow it to be there.
Allow it to be there and love that part of me. And Michael Singer talks about just sitting with the pain and observing it. And if you can sit with it long enough, it disappears.
Which is different than having the pain and going, oh no, I can't feel this way because if I feel this way, I'm not in the right frequency to manifest something.
Oh my God.
Right? Like that's what ends up happening.
You know my people.
Yes.
They're our people.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Right? I mean, that's huge.
It's massive.
That's huge.
It is massive. So there's a whole circuitous thing, and there's nothing easy about this, because if it's taken you years to get here, it's not going to unwind in a minute.
Right.
You're not going to learn something. You're not going to, when you have a collective group of 2,000 people together, you can generate a lot of really cool energy, and you can do a lot of really cool things, but the work is not there. The work is at home every single day. And I've been one of those people, I keep going back to those events. I kept going back to those events to get that hit, to get that love, to get that, all that stuff. And then I go back home and I'd be depressed.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And it's a vicious cycle because what I really need to be doing is practicing the work of meditation and being observant of my thoughts and being intentional.
And sometimes having someone,
kick your
it's
ass.
very hard work. It's having someone kick your ass for sure.
Thank you, Abby.
You're welcome. And it's really hard work to do alone.
It is.
Right? Like, and and I have always said, like, I have a guide, at least one of some kind that I'm working with all the time. And so that's why, having someone like you as their partner to work with, hiring someone like you is really important, to have that kind of thing, because it's nearly impossible to do on your own,
It is.
And I have all kinds of personality parts put in front of me by my teacher and by you and by, all the time.
Yeah.
So things that I wouldn't notice otherwise, right?
Yeah.
That I wasn't paying attention to.
And I'll tell you what, I value you, and I value when people give me feedback, because there are things that I say and do that I'm not aware of. And I don't think, and if you point it out to me, I welcome it. Of course, I yell at you first, but but
I know I get annoyed first, but then,
I know you're right. I mean, it's only mostly in joking, because I know you're absolutely right about whatever it is that I'm going through, and you show me something I haven't seen before. And I will tell you that most people don't like that. Most people don't want to hear their feedback.
No, and because most people aren't on that journey, this journey. But if you are on this journey, I hope you really listen to this episode a couple of times, because Patty shared a lot of incredible gems with us about really what this journey is really about, and how to make it do something for you, and how to really have profound change in your life. So I can't thank you enough, Patty. I would love to ask you if there's anything that, first, if there's anything that you would really like of all the things for the listeners to walk away with when it comes to how to hear your intuition or anything else that we've discussed today. What are you just desperately wanting people to know?
To stop worrying so much about shit. That really, that you don't have to go out and make something happen. That you are everyone is a divine being. And that for me, what my work is right now is find those unloving parts of me inside. If I'm being annoyed or distracted or angry or disappointed, when I have those things going on inside of me, I'm going to emotionally vomit on people. So I want people to start looking at those unloving parts of them and then find a way to make them into more loving parts. Because if we can love ourselves and be loved, then we start uniting the world by being kinder to others. And just know that for me and my experience is that indescribable compassion, that love is the only thing that heals. And how we show up for others. So you can go to any ayahuasca event, Bufo event, Dr. Joe event, Tony Robbins. You can keep going and going and going. But if you don't do the work of finding those things that keep you from source, you're just going to keep on getting what you're going to get.
Which is loving self.
Yes.
Yep.
Loving all of us and integrating it. And when we start learning to love ourselves, then we can love other people. That's really what I want people to know, is that we are not separate. We can have different beliefs, but still love each other. We can still be kind to each other. And my goal is for us to have a more loving world. And to do that, we have to find those loving things inside of us. So that's what it's all about that. It's all about love.
I love that. I love that. And it means really loving yourself, not just saying, oh, I love myself, I love myself. It means really, really catching the thoughts, catching the feelings. Like, wait a minute. That is a nasty thing to say to myself.
Yes.
I need to stop right here and take a moment.
And be aware of those unloving thoughts and say, aren't you sweet? Let me just love you right now. Because we don't. And it cannot be, this is another really important thing that I'm really getting. It cannot be an intellectual process.
Yes, 1,000%.
You and I just love to overanalyze everything, right? The fact of the matter is we need to experience gratitude in order to feel gratitude, to experience the pain in our life so we can love that part of ourselves. And that's where the transformation, it doesn't happen by going to event to event to event.
Or the mind talking to the mind.
Oh my.
Oh, yeah. Yes. No,
so
I love it.
Thank you for having me.
It. Yeah. Where can people find you, Patty?
So they can find me at patty-brick.com.
Yay.
And then they can also find me at, the best place to find me is at Mornings with Patty on YouTube. It's a channel that I have. Mornings with Patty. Yep.
And I'll put that all in the show notes.
Okay, thank you. And what I do is I read from one of my 6 spiritual readings every day. I have like over 135 of them now up recorded. And they're on everything from resentment to letting go to detachment to gratitude. So whatever you have a problem with that you're wanting, you can look on my YouTube channel, find it. And then I read a passage and then I give my take on it.
I love that. So you can get a quick hit if you're something in particular, or you can binge if you're stuck in a moment and you need help getting out. You can binge a few of those. So yes, thank you so much for being here. Listeners, Patty is a gem. I highly recommend you go and subscribe to her YouTube channel and check her out. Like I said, I will have all of those resources on the show notes. And if this was useful to you, please like and subscribe and pass it on so that other people know where to find some of this wisdom.
Oh, Abby, I love what you're bringing to the world. Thank you so much. It's awesome.